Hello, my name is Dan and I am an enthusiastic home gardener. So today I'm going to be making a video on what I think is one of the most important subjects in gardening, and that is indeed permaculture. So why am I making a video on this? Well, think back to when you were a child and you went into somebody's garden and somebody said, pick one of those lovely ripe fruits. You know, think of a lovely Victoria plum, think of a pear, cherry apple, already perfect, ready to eat, and you eat it and go, "Cough!" Or just think somebody set that one day, either that or a bird did or whatever did, but you get the idea. It was set before, so you are now reaping the rewards. Okay, so many things that you can set regards to permaculture, and permaculture is what it says, permanent things that you set. And of course, this will vary very much depending on your circumstances. If you're like myself and you've got a small to a medium-sized garden, maybe you've got a huge garden, maybe you've got acres. You know, maybe you live in a flat or apartment and you've got a small communal garden, so you've got room for maybe a few trees in some pots, some minarets, some dwarf trees. You know, it will vary very much depending on your circumstances. But if you've got any questions you want to ask me about root stocks or dwarfing plants or growing plants in containers, please feel free to post them down below. So we're going to have a little look round. You can see what I've got here and just give you some ideas really. Okay, so one thing that I think people who want to get into permaculture should really consider is growing grapes. Now, there's a massive misconception regarding growing grapes in the UK and similar climates. People think they're going to be sour. People think that some people think you can't grow grapes here, but indeed you can. So this is variety Autumn Royal, okay, which is actually a variety from California, I believe, and I planted this, I think, last year. So this is its first year in the polytunnel, and got a crop, carrying a decent crop for the age of the vine already down there. There, look more. Have a look at those again. And the plan is for it to train all the way up here, which it has. So next year there should be massive bunches of grapes all hanging down here, and it's going to be beautiful. So grapes is one thing. Okay, so this is another vine. This is variety Lakemont Seedless, which again is a US variety. I took this from a cutting, okay, so this is propagated for free. And grapes fruit on little stems that grow from or little tendrils that grow off of the previous year's growth. So if you see all this here, this has grown this year, and I've trained it along the fence using this rose wire. So next year, this should be absolutely loaded with fruit. Now, grapes grown outside will benefit very much from a south-facing wall or fence for the extra warmth, okay, so that's important if you're going to be growing grapes outside. But yes, very much worth growing grapes. Okay, so grapes, you can take cuttings, okay, I've got a video on how to take grape cuttings. You should be able to find that on the playlist if you're interested. But cutting here, one that's ready to go, some more that are ready to go. This is Lakemont Seedless, this is Muscat Blanc, and I took these in the previous dormant season. As you can see, all these lovely grapes there as well. There's some currant cuttings there as well. Okay, now there's no fruit on it because it's finished, but here is the season for the peaches to ripen has been and gone basically. So there you go, we've got a tree remaining. So this is a peach tree, and it gives me lovely crops. It's gave me lovely crops for about the last 3 years, and next year as well I'm expecting a crop, and it's just a beautiful, lovely tree. You do have to have issues. There are issues with a condition called peach leaf curl. I've got a video on how you can avoid that if you're interested. But peaches are perfectly possible to grow them in this country, nectarines as well, but my advice is grow them in a polytunnel or a greenhouse if you are indeed going to go about growing them. But yes, perfectly possible to grow those, and the trees, they do well in our climate as long as you can avoid the peach leaf curl. Okay, oranges. Now this is a blood orange, and it is carrying a crop. We can see there, look, see, but it would benefit, they do benefit from winter protection, so maybe a bit of, gardener's fleece or whatever they call it over to, just to keep the frost off of it, okay? And I intend to keep this in the polytunnel. Now, of course, it depends very much on where you're living. If you're living in, say, you know, a really cold part of Canada, you know, you'd have to think of something quite robust to protect. But I had this in an unheated conservatory last winter, and in fact it grew whilst it was in there. It did very well indeed. Okay, so this is a Yuzu, if you want to get into permaculture of citrus. Highly fragrant Yuzu fruit, looks a bit like grapefruits with an uneven skin. Try to get that into focus, hang on. Come on. There you go. The most important thing, hardy to -10 degrees C once established. So there we go. And we are indeed carrying its first ever fruit. Isn't that wonderful? Okay, so here is a Minaret Cherry, which basically means it's a vertical cordon, okay, and the tree, the rootstock will restrict the eventual, you know, the overall size of the eventual tree. With regards to cherries, you are wise to protect them from birds in the winter, okay, that's very important. But in the winter, sorry, when it's cropping, so very important to protect from birds. But once again, the cherry tree can provide you with lovely fruit. Okay, apples. Now this is a young tree. This is variety Worcester Pearman. So going to be getting a few apples off of that. Look, very sweet tasting apple, and particularly you know, here in the UK there are many different varieties. Apples traditionally do very well here in the UK, you know, so many different varieties and so much history attached. So apples are very, very much worth looking into, and once again they thrive in the climate here. Now this is a plum tree, variety Jubilee, and it's turning into a powerhouse of a tree. Something tells me that one day this tree is going to be really, really productive. Next year I'm expecting a lovely crop off of it. I'm going to be doing some pruning of it next year. You prune stone fruits after the fruit has set. That way you avoid silver leaf disease, okay, which is a condition you really don't want your trees to get because they can die. Okay. Now here we've got a pear tree. This is variety Concord, and it's said that if you're only going to grow one pear tree, Concord is a very good one to grow because it's largely considered self-fertile, okay, meaning it can produce fruit on its own pollen without a pollination partner. But it is recommended, if you can, to have another pear tree in the vicinity with, you know, that flower the same time of flowering, so that it helps with cross-pollination. So pear trees are very much worth, you know, looking into. Carrying a lovely crop here. I mean, look at that. Okay, so this is my little potting growing area. So a lot of this is sort of like, one could describe it very much as an investment for the future, which very much permaculture is. So the blueberries here, different varieties, they need ericaceous growing medium, acidic compost. These have done very well this year. If you check out my earlier videos this year, you'll see just how well they cropped. Strawberries here, these are variety Cambridge Favourite. Now, whether, you know, you will consider strawberries as permaculture is largely a matter of opinion, because the plants generally don't do that good once beyond about 3 years of age or 4. But they do produce runners, as you can see here, so you can just keep taking runners. So I'll be doing a video off of that. So in effect, once you you know, you've got your strawberry plants and they keep taking runners, provided you don't want new varieties or whatever, you may never have to buy strawberry plants again, and that's very powerful. Okay, so this is a persimmon, otherwise known as a Sharon Fruit, and here this is a pomegranate. Now it's going to be several years before these come into their own, but they will indeed do, and I've got a video on my channel about Sharon Fruit, and you see a mature tree, and they grow well in this climate, and very sweet and very tasty fruit, a touch of the exotic. Okay, so regarding economy, so if you think, you know, let's say you're going to be paying £30 for a tree that you want. Now you might think that's expensive, but if you think, take that pear tree for instance, that's given me more than £30 worth of pears since I bought that tree, okay, and it will slowly pay for itself. Of course, you want to get into sort of learning about feeding and enriching the soil to improve your chances of success. But regarding fruit trees, and particularly things like grapes as well, you do eventually get a good return on your investment. So of course that is a factor when considering you know, what you're going to be purchasing, especially again with grapes. If you're growing from cuttings that you've acquired for free and you manage to get pounds and pounds, kilos and kilos worth of grapes each year, just think eventually that's going to put some savings in your pocket, and that's a very important thing regards to gardening, because that means you've then got more money to buy new plants. Okay, so this is my container grown grape. It looks a bit rough at the moment because the wind has battered it. I've got to re-tie it up, but I'm expecting good crops off of this next year. So you can grow grapes in containers. Again, feeding is particularly important when things are grown in containers. Normally regarding growing grapes, if they're in the open ground, feeding is not necessarily that important because they thrive in poor soil and they put down very deep roots to find their nutrients in the water. But of course, if they're in a pot, they don't have this option, or in a container. So you need to learn about feeding. But yes, you can grow grapes in containers with success. Okay, another thing that I think is very important for permaculture would be something like tayberries. Now the crop has finished on these, but people that have viewed my channel regularly, you will remember, or may remember, just how much crop was on here, and they tend to be ready before the summer raspberries. So a very tasty crop, a cross between a blackberry and a raspberry, and they fruit on last year's growth. So what I'm going to be doing is the growth that the plant fruited on this year, I'm going to be cutting that away and leaving the growth from this year, tie that up, and that's where I will get the crop for next year. So very much, once again, worth looking at. Okay, so this is a pear tree variety onward, which is actually growing in a pot, and it's carrying a crop, and it's in a container. So there's the container down there, look, and indeed it crops well. Okay, so soft fruit, or more soft fruit, got gooseberries here, and these were carrying a great crop. I lost them actually, it was my fault, the pigeons ate them, I didn't cover them up, very stupid thing for me to do, but never mind. Black currant bushes there, more here, and another very important thing for permaculture is raspberries, because they can live for years and years and years. I know a gentleman, an elderly gentleman, who set his raspberries where they are years and years ago, and they just keep producing new canes, and of course you can dig them up and to use them and repropagate, put them other places, establish new raspberry beds. Very, very a great crop to grow. Okay, so this is a Royal Gala that I've got growing in a container, carrying a small crop. Royal Gala or Gala. Okay, so there you go, a little bit about permaculture there. So when you're thinking about permaculture, just think permanent, okay? And of course, you might not reap the rewards, that quick. You might put a tree in and you might not get a crop for 4 or 5 years, or at least a decent crop. But you've got to be thinking, in 5 to 10 years' time, you'll be thinking, cool, I'm glad, I'm glad that I set that tree or that bush or whatever. Of course, if you move, the person who lives thereafter might be glad that you did it, but you understand where I'm coming from. So this is about sustainability and feeding yourself, feeding whoever. And of course, with the sort of issues that we are facing as a society, it's very important. And particularly, if you can find a way of growing exotics that do at least, that, like figs, for instance. Imagine if you can grow a good crop of your own figs. Think of the price of them in the shop. You'll be glad you'll be glad you did. That's my opinion, anyway. So regarding figs, these are some cuttings, variety Blanche that Vinny from the channel Fruit Nut sent me. Very kind of him. Okay, so I've got a fig tree here. It's carrying its first ever crop. One fig, but it's growing in a container. I've got a video up on how I put it in the container, but yeah, I'm expecting a good crop off of this next year. Going to be giving this some feed, some of the old seaweed feed. The coffee plant growing really well, and thanks, I said it the other day as well, but thanks to one of my viewers who reminded me that coffee naturally grows as an understory plant, is thriving in here as an understory plant, so I'm very happy. Oh yes, permaculture, another thing, tea. I have the tea plant here, which is growing really well. And again, you can grow tea in the UK, and there are tea plantations here in the UK. So many options available, and don't get sort of, what's the term, overwhelmed by all of this. It takes time, you know. I didn't get where I am in regards to gardening overnight. I mean, I've been at this heavily now for a number of years, and that was with a basis from, you know, with childhood knowledge that I'd acquired. So you know, it just don't get overwhelmed if you're going to start by buying a blueberry bush and putting it in a container of ericaceous compost, and that's your start. Then that's your start. You know, things don't happen just like that. You know, think about, again, particularly with permaculture, think about 5 to 10 years in advance, and you'll be glad that you did, and the birds will be glad, and, you know, making nests in your trees maybe in the future. The bees will be glad as well. You know, people building tree houses maybe in the trees that you build in the future. You know, all these little things in life, they're not little really, are they? They're big things, but we can sometimes forget. But growing and thinking for the future is certainly something that is indeed very important. I mean, think of them giant redwood trees that you see that somebody set years and years ago. Okay, I know they're not providing food, but they're doing their bit for, you know, for nature. They're doing their bit for clean air. Clean air, you know, very, very important, and you can partly do your bit by setting a few trees. Small steps lead to great things. Right, I think that's enough for this video. Sun's come out now, and if you like my work, please feel free to like, share and subscribe, and any comments, questions, please feel free to post them down below. And just one more thing, some of the grapes, these, I'm not going to show you the full vine because I've shown them in previous videos, but I've got some different varieties of grapes all waiting in these containers for planting out in the dormant season next month. And the tomato ripening. See you next time.